Good morning. So I wanted to do a little bit more learning in public with the Anthropic Claude Code models. Yesterday we looked at doing a very small refactoring with all three models, Haiku, Sonnet, and Opus, and all of them produced 100% the exact same code in roughly the same time, Haiku being a bit faster and Sonnet being a bit slower. So today I wanted to do the same exact experiment except with a more complex refactoring. So this is my Big Sexy Poems app. This is where we're doing all of the experimentation. And if I go to add a poem and I enter a poem with no name, you'll see that it has an error, that the poem name cannot be empty. And behind the scenes, this creates an error log that gets written to the local file system. And that's only in local development. And you can see over here on the right, I have a little local development module, and we have 11 logs. If we do this again, you'll see this goes from 11 to 12. And locally, if we jump over into the file system, those are being written to this log folder. And it's a lexicographic sorting here based on the date and time. And we can open up and let's collapse these and we can get down to our type. And what we can see is that the type of this error is poem name empty. And some of these are informational, like the application's been bootstrapped. Some of them are low-level Cold Fusion errors, such as a missing include. And these are being written to the local file system just to make me diligent about tracking errors before I deploy to production. So what I want to do is, instead of having to look through this log folder, I want to be able to turn this into a link, click on it, and get kind of a web-based view of that log folder. It's going to be a single page, and it's just going to output all of the errors that are in that directory. So it's very scoped, it's very self-contained, but it's a little bit more robust than the previous experiment, and it's a little bit more open-ended, meaning there's not as much prior art to look at when doing the code refactoring. And just as with the experiment yesterday, I'm going to create a prompt MD file that I'm going to be able to feed into all of the models so that we get the same exact input and we can compare the output. The prompt is going to be, the prompt to Claude that is going to be read prompt MD and implement the plan. Do not ask for clarifying questions. Everything I know about this is in the document. If you are unsure, use your best judgment. And this is, again, just to get a baseline for how some of these models can interpret these prompt files and proceed with a little bit more autonomy. Now, this is the funny part, right? I have this relatively detailed prompt file, and this took me, I don't know, like 45 minutes to put together. And honestly, I could have written the code in less than 45 minutes, probably. And so it's going to be odd to find that trade-off where actually implementing the code is going to take more time than writing the specification. I'm not there yet. So let's just take a quick look to see what I've specified. The local development environment, the error logger writes a copy of each processed error to the log folder, and that's the folder that we were just looking at here. These text files are named based on timestamps and counters, such that they are listed lexicographically with the newest errors at the bottom. Right now, in order to look at these logs, I have to open up the log folder in my IDE and click through each file individually. I want to streamline this process with a web-based interface that is only accessible during local development. Then I give it an implementation plan. The local development only log viewer will be a single page experience with one index.cfm file. So I'm trying to tell it how I want this to be built so that it doesn't have to ask me questions. It's going to be located in this www root internal folder. Notice that the logs folder here doesn't exist yet. It's going to have to create that. It'll be built outside of the main client asset pipeline and routing system. So there's a whole bunch of prior art here in terms of how the main application works, but this is a development tool. It is not meant to be inside of this client. So I want to see how distracted it might get by some of those prior art details. All the CSS should be embedded inside this single file. It's a self-contained experience, but it should be still built on application best practices and my stylistic preferences. So in order to do this, right now, the logs get written as TXT files. So it's going to have to update the logging implementation to write JSON files instead of text files. It's going to update that end logs label, and that's the thing that we're just seeing here, Right now it's just static text. It's going to have to update that to be a link to point to that internal logs folder that it's creating. It's going to create that index.cfm file as a self-contained ColdFusion page with CF script at the top and the HTML at the bottom. If this is not live, this is actually supposed to be, if config is live, this page should throw an app forbidden. This is a development tool. It should only work in local development environments. This new page should list the JSON files in this folder. So these are going to become .json, not .text. And then it's going to sort them lexigraphically so that the newest logs are at the top. Each log entry should be rendered as a detail. So I'm going to use the disclosure widget, the native disclosure widget for HTML. And the summary should either be the error message if it exists, the error type if it exists, the message if it exists, or the file name of the JSON file if it exists. And it should fall back in order of preference. So not all of these data structures contain the same. So if I look at the bootstrap, for example, it just has .message. But if I look at something like the missing include, we can see that this has a error message, could not find the included template. And then if we look at my domain model errors, this message is actually empty. So instead what I wanted to use is the error.type. Now I'm telling it in the implementation here that it can use the coalesce truthy function to essentially do all the fallbacks with the safe navigation operators. So I'm really trying to give it all of the tripping points that a junior developer might run into when trying to implement this logic. Maybe I'm overspecifying. I'm not really sure, to be honest. The contents of the disclosure widget should be a pre that contains a dump of the whole log entry. The details should be closed by default, except for the first newest error that should be open by default. So essentially I want to have a single page that represents all of this data that can be toggled open and closed, but the latest one should always be open because that's probably the one I want to look at. Telling it what page title to use, telling it that the main content can be a max width of 1,000 pixels, and that it can use the UI less. So that's my kind of main CSS file for inspiration. But that's part of the main client asset pipeline. That's not actually going to be available in this context. So I'm saying you can use it for inspiration, but do not assume that these styles are available. If you want to use any of them, you basically have to reproduce these CSS properties in the style tag of the self-contained page. So I'm trying to give it, again, every piece of information that I can think of that it might need to know in order to build this the way that I want it to be built. Now, let's do this experiment. If we jump over into the terminal and we look at our branches here, I have via Haiku, via Opus, and via Sonnet. And these right now are just all branches of master. So let's check out via Haiku first, and then we're going to go into Claude. And we're going to make sure that we are cleared, and we're going to make sure that we're using the right model. We're going to do Haiku. Okay, so we have the Haiku model, we've cleared, we're on the via Haiku branch. So now let me scroll up here, and I'm just going to copy and paste this. And let's let it cook. Okay, so it crunched for 1 minute and 56 seconds. And let's now go into our Git branch here. And let's just take a look at what it did. So this is that local development file. We can see that it updated from filtering on text files to filtering on JSON files. Excellent. That's exactly what we wanted. It added the link to the internal logs. It updated the logger to write a serialized JSON payload as opposed to writing the text file. It, let's see, it looks like it factored out some of the stub. File name already exists. Okay, so it added logic that Honestly, it didn't need to. This basically just overwrote whatever the previous dump was. This is taking care to increment a value while the previous file still exists. I did not ask it to do that. I don't think that's necessary, but it's interesting that it did it. Oh, because I have a bunch of, sorry. All right, let's do diff master now. It had unwatched things. Let's jump down. So that was the logger. So here's the internals of the index page. It includes the config. It includes the request metadata. It includes the global CFMLX functions. If it's live, it throws the forbidden error. That's what I asked it to do. If it's a post and the delete logs is true, did it param that? So it didn't param the form delete logs. So that's unfortunate. I would have parammed that to be false by default. It looks at the logs, it gets all of the JSON files, it loops over them, it deletes them. So that's the processing at the top. I'm pretty sure there's some safe file exists stuff in CFMLX that I probably should have used. It should never have to check to see if this log directory exists. There's a .git ignore inside of that folder. That folder will always exist, so this is totally unnecessary. It's sorting the files lexicographically. It's reading them. It's deserializing them. This is the thing that drives me crazy about all these agentic AIs. It's like they just love their freaking try catches. We should be able to depend on this code working. In fact, if we look at the prompt, and we look at the deserialize, it should be deserialized into a struct, and I say, oh, okay to assume that the struct is the result. I'm telling it to expect that to work, and still it tried to put a try catch in there. It just can't help itself. Probably what I would have done is just mapped the file query onto an array of the structures. But, you know, it is what it is. It has some private methods. And then it has its own CSS. Let's just get down farther. All right, we have our logs container. We're looping over the logs. We have our details. If it's the first index here, it's going to default to open. That's what I asked it to do. The summary is the get summary. Actually, let's scroll up to see what the get summary was, because that was going to be an interesting thing. So I told it it could use the coalesce truthy with the safe navigation operator. And that's exactly what it did. It's looking for the message, then it's looking for the error type, then it's looking for the non-error message, and if all else fails, it looks for the file name. I'm pretty sure that the file name should always exist because it's reading from the file system. So where would it even come up with this data if no file name existed? This is probably unnecessary logic. But let's scroll back down. All right, so overall, it looks like this is working. It's escaping the output, which is what we always want to see with potentially content that might contain user-generated input. And here is the delete form. It added a confirmation. I didn't ask it to do that, but that's fine. You can see here that it has the hidden input for the delete logs set to true. That's the thing that I would have parammed, but it didn't bother to param it. And that's it. So it did all the code. Let's try running this just to see what it looks like. Oh, right. It's not happening because all of the existing files are .txt files. So let's go to add a poem. We'll get that error. Now we're getting the one log. All right, there we go. So we have our error. All right, so it works. I mean, there's no error here to do. We can do, let's do test, and I can go into the composer, and if I do test here, it will simulate an error. So now let's come back here and let's refresh, and we can see the issue is that I think none of these actually have details. We'll gloss over that for now. Okay, so what we got again was that our Haiku model did what it needed to do, and it did it in 1 minute and 56 seconds. So let us now compare that to the other models. So I'm going to git add, let's commit here. Let's see, cooked for, what is it? 1 minute, 56 seconds. All right, that should be all the files. So now let's check out master, git log. Sorry, I meant git branch, git checkout via Sonnet. All right. Let me close the files that are no longer. All right, don't save. All right, so now what we're going to do is go back into Claude. So let's quit out of this. Let's go back in. Let's clear and let's choose the right model. We're going to do Sonnet. All right, and now again, we're going to do the exact same thing. Haiku. Okay, so it cooked for 3 minutes, 49 seconds. So let's just come back into, right, we're on, let's add, and we'll say git commit. Oops. So it cooked for 3 minutes and 49 seconds. I'm not going to bother running it, but let's look at the implementation here. So it updated to the JSON file. We needed to do that. It updated the internal link to go to the logs. It did that. We can see it actually was a little bit easier here. It didn't do all that counter shenanigans that Haiku did. It's just writing the payload as a JSON file. So that's more in line with what I would have done. Here's the internal implementation of the logs: config, request metadata, global CFMLX functions. If it's live, it throws an error. That's exactly. Here's the paramming of that delete log that I was talking about earlier. If it's a post and that's true, delete all the logs, refresh. That's exactly what I wanted. Delete all logs, gets the JSON files, loops over them, deletes them one at a time. That's fine. Get log entries. It's looking for the JSON. Sorting names descending. So if you remember from the Haiku version, it was actually doing the sort in the code itself here. It wasn't doing it through the directory list. I'm pretty sure that's valid. Lots of much less try catch stuff here. We probably could have done just a return file names map instead of doing this, building the entries explicitly. But that's just a small stylistic change. I'm just going to jump over a lot of the body stuff here, or the CSS rather, get down to the implementation. Looping over the log entries, details, either open or close. So instead of an if statement, it's using the ternary operator. It's doing the same kind of coalesce truthy with the safe navigation operator for the message, the type, the message, and the file name. So it inlined it here. Haiku did it as a separate function. Here we just get the dump directly of the data. This is much easier than what Haiku was attempting to do with its private function that actually caused an error. And we get here. So the implementation is actually very similar. I do think that Sonnet's implementation is nicer and is actually more in line with some of the choices that I would have made. Probably I would have just put this somewhere actually up here when I'm doing the entries. Why bother doing that in the HTML when I could just have it nicely neat here up in the script? But overall, this is basically the same implementation. Again, I'm not going to run it this time because it probably has some errors in it. I don't want to distract, but we could actually also look if we quit out of this. Okay, so that was Sonnet. So now let us, I don't have anything open, right? All right, let's do git checkout via Opus. And let us clear. Let's quit out of Claude, go back into Claude, clear the memory space. Let's choose the right model. We're going to go up to Opus. And again, now we're just going to take the same exact prompt and paste it in. And here we go. All right, now let me just copy this and let's go back over here. It's all the same stuff. Let's commit just so that we have a reference for it. Okay, so again, I'm not going to run it, but I am going to look at how this branch is different than the master branch. Again, it's using the JSON files instead of the text files. That's what we wanted. It's replacing the static label to a link to the internal logs. Inside of the logger, just as Sonnet did, Opus is just going to dump the JSON payload to the file. It's not going to jump through all the rigmarole about counters and making sure it doesn't overwrite itself. So now we're getting into the actual log viewer itself. Same exact thing we had in all three implementations. If it's live, it throws a forbidden. That's exactly what we want to see. Just like Sonnet, Opus is paramming. That's what I would have expected it to do. It's checking to see if it's a post and that the default log, the delete logs, is true. In that case, it gets all the logs, iterates over them, safe deletes. Okay, so I had mentioned in the Haiku part that there was a safe file delete where it doesn't have to do any try catches. That's exactly what I was expecting it to use, and then it refreshes the page. It has get logs in some sort of a private function. I'm assuming that's at the bottom of the page. So let's skip over the CSS. I care much less about the CSS. All right, now we're down to the implementation of the viewer here. We're iterating over, interesting, this one's doing an index loop as opposed to a collection loop. If it's the first one, it opens it. It outputs the label. All right, so I had mentioned in the Sonnet version that I would have done that inside of the script, and it looks like that's what the Opus version did, except I think the get logs part is at the bottom of the page, so we haven't seen it yet. And then the output here is a CF dump. Now, I had told it to be a pre-tag, so it did not do a pre-tag, and I had told it, well, whatever. I told it to do a pre-tag and it didn't do that. I was very explicit, like, right, if we jump in the code here and we look down at the summary, I said that the disclosure element should be a pre that contains the dump of the whole log entry. So it didn't quite follow that, whatever. If there are logs, here's that delete all error, delete all form. And then here's the get logs at the bottom. And so we can see it's looking for the JSON in the logs directory. It's doing the in-memory sort here as opposed to the sort in the directory list that the Sonnet version was doing. So just interesting little differences in logic here. Again, it's doing try catch around the deserialization when I'm telling it that the deserialization should work. It shouldn't have to worry about this. So it really irritates me how much try catch the application, the Claude agents do. I'm going to have to add that to my Claude MD file. But we can see that it is using that coalesce truthy to look for the error message, the error type, the data message. And this one knows that there's a file name, right? In the previous versions, it was checking to see if the file name existed using the safe navigation operator, which it should never have to do because it read the file from the file system. The file name always exists. So we can see that more or less these things all did the same thing with just some stylistic issues. So just as a quick roundup here, if we do a git log at the via Haiku, that was 1 minute, 56 seconds. If we do a git log of via Sonnet, that was 3 minutes, 49 seconds. So a full 2 minutes longer, basically. And then git log via Opus. 336. So Opus in this case was a little bit faster than Claude Sonnet, but it was still much, much slower than Haiku. And Haiku roughly did the same code as all of them. So that's pretty exciting. And I think, again, is a testament to the strengths that Claude has in terms of its speed with not a drastic trade-off in quality. There was some elegance that I think the Sonnet and the Opus implementations had here, but for the most part, it was very similar stuff. So groovy, more learning to do, and but I'm feeling better about the different models right now.